Okay, so it is just about 12:05 p.m. I want to go ahead and get started. If you haven't yet done so, please go ahead and answer those poll questions because I'm going to I'm going to close that out in just a moment, and I'm going to share the results after our first slide. Again, today's webinar is sponsored by Oak and Reads. My name is Dave Collins. I'll be your facilitator for the day today. I'm the founder and CEO of Oak and Reads. So let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, at Oak and Reads, we are an interactive training consultancy. So we work with our clients to develop communication skills, collaboration skills. We work a lot with interviewing, public speaking, and now we're working almost exclusively on helping people work through this fully remote transition and this transition to working 100% from home. It has a lot to do with change management, has a lot to do with communication skills, a lot to do with collaboration skills. And today what we're going to focus on our values and team building skills and how we use this opportunity to create a empowered remote work culture. We work with a lot of different clients. So whether you're working in technology or advertising, whether you're a university, a business school, a toy company, a design and architecture firm, whatever you are, you're probably faced with some of these communication and collaboration challenges today, which is probably why you're here. So again, these are going to be agnostic of industry and focus really specifically on building powerful, high-functioning remote teams. So here's what we're doing today. Here's why we're here. This is going to be a 30-minute webinar, so I'm going to move very quickly, and I'm going to get to all of your questions at the end of that 30 minutes. The first thing we're going to talk about are how can you maintain your social and professional ties during social distancing, right? We're all experiencing some various degrees of having to be separate from other humans, certainly not going into the office. How can we still have valuable and useful cultures when we can't see each other in person? I'm going to give you some exercises today to help us look at how you can discuss some of these values behaviors that will help you build trust amongst your fully remote teams. Trust is probably the most important aspect of a fully remote team, but it's also something when there's a lot of change and uncertainty, some bad negative behaviors and habits can start to form when we can't see each other in person every day. And then finally, we're going to talk about how can you use some online tools, some really basic online tools to make the most out of remote collaboration. I'm going to give you some of those, share some links. And I'm also really looking to hear from you out there in the chat box. What are some tools that you and your teams are using that you want to share with other people? I think it's going to be really interesting. So I want to get started with a little bit of context. I think when it comes to remote work, it can be very challenging and draining on ourselves emotionally and on just our ability to be patient and cognizant and empathetic amongst all of our people in our lives. There's this really great quote from the Atlassian Guide to Remote Work from a fully remote worker where she talks about pacing yourself. Working remotely means you get a lot of quiet, heads down time to do deep work, but deep work is exhausting. Building 5-10-minute breaks into your day, walking around the block, calling your mom, petting your cat, taking care of yourself so you still have gas left in the tank on Friday to enjoy your personal time. Last weekend, I went out and just walked around a rose garden that's near my home, my apartment in Oakland. I put my phone down, I kept it away from me for a few hours and just disconnected. Whatever that thing is that you can do to take those true breaks, it's going to be really even more important now for you to take care of yourself and pace yourself, being patient with yourself, being patient with your team members, and enjoying that separation between personal time and work time. You're going to have to be even more explicit. So depending on what degree of social distancing you're doing, it's still important to get outside the house, take a break, and enjoy some outdoor nature because we are going to feel really cooped up in our homes. So to that end, what I'd love to do is share some of these poll results with the group. So I'm going to go ahead and share those right now. Thank you everyone for voting. We had almost 40 people vote. And I'm really curious to see what we have here. So, when it comes to working fully remote, I'm with question one, it sounds like almost half of us are feeling fine, right? Not necessarily phenomenal, but this is sort of kind of what we expect. Good to fine is common. There's going to be disruptions. Hopefully some of what we're going to talk about today can help you with some of those. Also, when it comes to a formal remote work policy, There's a wide range of things. I'm noticing talking with clients right now that everyone is in varying degrees of developing and finalizing and editing these remote work policies. I'm going to actually be sharing a link with you that will share widely some of the remote work policies that companies are publishing publicly, which hopefully you can adapt for your own use. If you're still in the early stage where you're kind of ad hoc, I see a lot of people both ad hoc over the last 2 weeks, and all it is you're working from home now, kind of figure it out. Hopefully some of those resources will help. Core work hours is something I think is really important. We have almost no is winning out on the core work hours thing. So I think if there's one thing I can encourage you and your teams to discuss, it's setting those core work hours and really enforcing them. Looks like only 31% of us are saying those core work hours are enforced. Because again, when you're trying to make that split between homework and personal time, it's really important that you're not getting pings on Slack, texts from your boss, emails from your team at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night when you're really trying to separate, because you don't have the physical separation anymore. It's only digital. And dedicated work from home space. Love to see close to 70% of us have that dedicated space from home. If you want some tips on how to set that up, check out last week's webinar where I talk about some of the essentials for setting up your dedicated home workspace. Really, really important to create that separation. And what house are you? Okay, I love to see Hufflepuff almost winning. I obviously sit between a couple different houses. I say obviously, you don't know this. Me personally, I've been feeling, somewhat Hufflepuffy, somewhat Ravenclaw-y over these last couple weeks. The creativity, the research in Ravenclaw, but also Hufflepuff, the loyalty, the commitment to justice. I love that part of Hufflepuff. But of course, Gryffindor is always a winner. So, they're the most popular. Anyway, let's keep going. I want to get into the content for today. Again, if you have questions about any of those poll results, please go ahead and ask those questions in the Q&A box. I'm starting to see some of those coming already. So the first thing I want to talk about today is around maintaining social and professional ties when we are stuck at home and during remote working. And the big question is, how can we keep up with those social aspects of work, the cultural aspects of work when we're stuck at home? One of the things I think is really important is thinking about trust with teammates. So there's this great quote in the Guide to Remote Work by High Five. I really highly recommend that. You can Google it. The quote is, remote teams have to trust their teammates. In a remote team, there aren't any silly rules about having your butts in a seat during certain hours of the day. This means at the end of the week, you either have to have something to show for your week or not. It means you trust that your teammates are getting something done, but also your teammates trust you. To earn that trust, you need to make sure you have something to show for your work each week. So part of that is starting to develop this habit of a daily team check-in. And this is a meeting I think is really important to have now that we're going to fully remote work. It doesn't have to be long, but it needs to have a couple goals. One is to socialize, right? We need to see each other. We need to make jokes. We need to keep those inside jokes going. I'll give you some ideas for socializing in a moment. Really critically, you need to triage problems, right? There's going to be a lot of new types of problems, process-related problems, technology-related problems, communication-related problems. As a group, you're going to need to solve those quickly and figure out what is the most important, what are the blockers. And of course, building trust. So you need to see what people are working on because you're not going to see it as frequently without these regular connections. So here's some tools to help you with those 3 goals for your daily check-in. Socializing, I talked about the check-in, and I talked about that last week, and what I mean by this is start every meeting with 3 questions. You can go around the group, you can break off into small breakout groups if you're using Zoom, there's really good features for that, and just have everyone answer these 3 questions. What's one thing on your mind professionally? What's one thing on your mind personally? There's probably a lot of things on people's minds, just pick one. And what's your goal for today? If you can get everyone to share that, again, it's a way to both acknowledge a lot of the things going on in our lives, as well as setting specific intentions that you can then revisit in the next day or in some of your one-on-ones. And with triaging, you want to be thinking about removing blockers. What is the feedback you can give to the group on processes that is going to help you move forward and build your remote working habits? And the tool I use for that is Keep, Toss, Create. I talked about this a little bit last week, and what I mean by that is with certain processes or projects you're working on, you want to be providing group feedback at the team level on what things are working well that you want to keep in terms of processes, what processes aren't working well that you want to toss out, And what are some new ideas, new tools, new processes, new communication patterns that you want to create? If you can provide feedback in that format, it makes sure that things stay productive and constructive, and it doesn't turn into a complain fest, right? So you're trying to think about, what do we want to get rid of? What do we want to keep? And what do we want to do differently? And finally, this idea of building trust. I'm going to keep talking about this idea of focusing on trust, but this is also an opportunity to share outcomes. So in thinking about a remote work environment, you need an opportunity for people to talk about what they're doing so that we all feel confident everyone is contributing. So sharing a quick note on what you got done in the previous day and the impact it's going to make or you think it will make is, again, another framework for making sure people are comfortable and confident that they know their colleagues are really focusing and they know what's happening around them. So another thing around feedback is just to zoom out with this idea of giving feedback. It's important to remind ourselves of some best practices. So what feedback does when we give it at the team level, it promotes trust and it promotes being candid with each other about what may not be working. That's a habit we need to build, especially when we need to be really clear and direct if something isn't working, because the fixes are going to be a little bit more difficult to do remotely. So identify blockers, identify things that are working well that you want to keep focusing on. That's why the keep, toss, create is really useful. And again, think about the difference between positive feedback and constructive feedback. Positive feedback is just as important, if not more so, especially in a really highly change-focused situation where we want to recognize and reinforce the good habits. And constructive feedback, what we want to do there is intervene early if things aren't working, right? Nip it in the bud, do it now so it doesn't become a disaster later on. And understand as a leader what resource needs you can help with. Another thing that's really important to think about is who you give positive feedback to versus who are the right people for constructive feedback. Again, this is high level, but I think it's really important to remind ourselves as we're focusing on building trust, who needs what type of feedback. Positive feedback, what it does is it increases people's commitment to doing the work. It enhances the work experience and that you feel seen and you feel recognized for doing something well, so that it's not happening in a silo, which it can be very much feel like we're working in silos when we're stuck at home. And it helps build confidence that you're doing something right and ownership over the processes and things you're creating with your outputs. Critically, who needs more positive feedback? Novices, beginners. People who aren't feeling as confident actually need more of that positive feedback. Even though they're not doing it quite as well, it's still important to highlight the parts they're doing well. That helps people be more at ease while learning. Now, given the context of remote work, a lot of people will be very uncomfortable using some tools. You probably know who those people are on your teams who are less confident working remotely and using some of these remote tools. Even though those people are probably doing it the worst right now, those are actually the people who need the positive encouragement the most, so that while they're going through all these changes, they can feel more comfortable and they don't lose a lot of morale. So it's a little bit counterintuitive there. They may not be the experts, but they get more of the positive feedback. Constructive feedback, again, it's kind of obvious, sort of the flip side. It's informative and it shows people where they need to spend energy to improve. And it's actually experts that thrive on constructive feedback. They're already confident that they know what they're doing and they know how to do it. They actually need your help as a leader or a manager to figure out where to focus even more energy to get even better and more expert at the things they're already doing well. So again, a little counterintuitive, but this will go a long way towards making sure that feedback conversations are productive. So the other type of thing that is going to be critical for you to maintain these social ties are virtual one-on-ones. You're probably already starting to do this right now, but again, thinking about your goals for these meetings. One, you want to have genuine connections. This is genuine FaceTime where you shut down your alerts, you put your phone down, and you have a one-on-one conversation. I was talking with a colleague yesterday and she was mentioning it's really hard for people to focus and listen well on virtual calls. This is something where multitasking really needs to be put to a minimum because you're trying to give as much of yourself to that person as possible. This is also an opportunity to provide coaching. So you're solving team problems in the team meetings, but helping someone solve individual problems and empowering them to solve them themselves. That's where the coaching comes in here in those one-on-ones. So some tools you can use for these one-on-ones. Think about your active listening skills. I love talking about active listening, and there's a whole other webinar probably coming soon around how to practice this as a muscle, but some really quick tips for being a better active listener on virtual calls. Notice body language, facial expressions, and tone. This is extra hard when you're not in person, but you can still see me, right? You can see my face, you can see my energy, you can see my reactions, you can sense my tone. So commenting on some of these things, acknowledging them if you're noticing some negative ones, and allowing people to share some of those because they may be trying to express anxiety or fear or uncomfortableness through physicality. And it's just as important to acknowledge those communications as well as the words they're saying. When you're listening, provide encouragement, right? Keep saying things like, keep going. Oh, that's interesting. Or that's really hard. Could you talk a little bit more about what's going on there? Small little words to encourage the person to keep talking. Especially important in remote meetings where the encouragement may even come in the form of, hey, John, I haven't heard from you in this meeting yet. Would you like to share? Actively cold calling on people. But again, in a one-on-one context, you don't have to cold call on someone. They're right in front of you. And finally, with active listening, it's really important to reflect back what you've heard, right? That ensures that one, the person talking knows that you got the message. And two, it's a way to clarify that you heard it correctly. Because we may think we're hearing it right. And when we reflect back saying something like, oh, it sounds like you're worried about this, or it sounds like your number one priority is that, you may have gotten it wrong. So it's an opportunity to clarify. And finally, when it comes to coaching, a really helpful tool in these one-on-ones is GROW. And GROW is just an acronym for the types of questions you want to ask someone to help them work through a challenge. So a GROW coaching session starts with asking the person about their goals as they relate to a certain challenge. So what do you want out of the situation? Then you get into the reality. So what's going on right now? What are the details? What's the current situation? Describe to me what's going on. Get them to flesh out the challenge or the situation of the project in their own words. Then you want to start asking questions about opportunities, asking them to start with proposing solutions, right? What could you do? What are the other options? What tools do you have at your disposal? As a coach, you want to resist the urge to just give them the solution. You want to ask them to problem solve. Again, that's going to help people develop those skills rather than just handing them the answer on a silver platter. And finally, asking them to make commitments. So of these opportunities and these ideas, what will you do next? What are you going to commit to? What's your next step? Make a commitment and ask, how can you support them in taking these actions? So again, it's a short little framework. I find this is really useful for guiding people through solving their own challenges rather than just giving them the answers. And thinking about coaching, it's important to remind yourself, what are the aspects of a good coach? So again, being a great listener, being open-minded, willing to change a point of view, curiosity to help you ask these great questions, and self-aware. You don't want to be giving people advice on things that you don't do well already. So I'll be honest with people as a coach, people understand when you're kind of BSing them versus asking them interesting questions and proposing ideas that you yourself would take that advice. Effective coaching, the most important focus of an effective coach is empowering the other person to find their own solutions. Again, coming back to this idea of trust, you want to trust people that they can independently solve problems, especially if you're not there. So be a coach and help them explore possibilities. Don't just solve the problem for them. That's the skill we're trying to build today. And finally, efficient coaching is really good when you are allowing them to explore ideas they didn't think of before. And you're also validating some of their own abilities that maybe, especially in a really tumultuous, that's not a word, in a really turbulent time where people may forget about some of their really core skills as they're learning a lot of things that get them feeling more uncomfortable, remind them of where their core strengths are and appeal to those, because that's a really useful use of a coaching session. All right, so again, I'm moving pretty quickly. This recording will be available for you, but I want to be efficient and give you a lot of information in a short period of time. Next, we're going to talk about values and trust with remote teams. This is, again, relating to building an empowered remote team that doesn't start to splinter apart when you don't have the face-to-face interactions. So when it comes to building trust, the best, simplest way is to have conversations about values. And what's really important is to use this opportunity as a chance to revisit your team or your organization or company's value statements, because I think this is an opportunity to strengthen those and to start to expand our conception of what culture looks like to both be in office and in remote settings, we still need to live our values. And that's going to be a nice place to return to have a set of agreed upon decisions on how we want to operate. So when you're having a values discussion, a team meeting is a great place for that. Your goal is to give focused feedback and coaching by referring to company values when you're asking about behaviors. So revisiting values, thinking about questions like, what are useful remote working behaviors that we can demonstrate that allow us to live our values, our company values, more explicitly? What are things we can see others doing that will reinforce our commitment to our company values? Also, the flip side is, what are the bad behaviors or the negatively impactful behaviors that put our values at risk, right? That's really important too, to highlight the things we don't want to see. And also, this may be an opportunity to add a new value, right? We're reinvestigating all of these different aspects of daily work. Maybe we need a new one to help ground ourselves in our remote teams. So new values like trust. If you don't have that already, I think it's a really, really important one to have for a remote group. A value or values behavior around assuming good intent, or at least the idea of assuming when something doesn't go wrong, your first instinct should be assuming someone was ignorant of something rather than malicious, right? So setting that as an example. Another value may be patience, right? This is especially difficult right now. We may need this with remote workers who are struggling a little bit in whatever aspect, technology, communication, emotionally, generating some empathy. Patience might be a new value for your remote team. What else? I'm actually curious for you to chime in the chat. You know, what are some of the things, or you can put this in the Q&A section, what are some of the values that you and your team are looking at right now that will help? Yeah, you can chat into the webinar chat. What are some of the values that you and your team are looking at right now that are core? So I'm starting to see some of those come together. In this together, I think, is a great one. That's an example from Michael. Thanks for sharing that. Continue to put those in there as I'm going to move on. So one way to focus this is a discussion within your team meeting. So here's an exercise you can do and adapt for your own groups. So pick one of your existing values for your team check-in, and then ask your team to discuss the following ideas. You know, when do we see this value demonstrated when we're in the office, right? During normal circumstances. And how have we seen that value demonstrated over the last 2 weeks now that we're working virtually? Start to get some examples. You want to write these down and share them publicly. Start to put together a shared document that you can continue to edit and add to as the situation unfolds. You want to then ask people for some specific examples to positively reinforce, again, that idea of positive feedback on things people are doing well, right? So an example, like, I loved when Carl took initiative to set up a Zoom call for us to check in last week. I thought that really demonstrated our value of team first for the following reasons, right? Get those specific examples written down so that people feel like they're being seen and we know what is the right type of evidence that's going to continue to be something we look for. Same token, discuss some of the red flags, right? What is it going to look like when we're not living that value in person or virtually? And think about, you know, maybe don't call out specific examples on your team. That could be tough, but think about what are some examples you don't want to see in the coming days and weeks that demonstrate that someone isn't living this value virtually. And then finally, think about going forward, right? What are we going to commit to? Make some commitments as a group based on those behaviors. What are we going to ask people to do? I'm going to ask people to set up one-on-ones individually, right? We're going to ask people to start to write down some of our processes and share those publicly, so you don't have that information residing in your head and we don't have to ask you all these times. People can access some of those tools that maybe only existed in people's heads or on individuals' computers, right? These are some examples of some specific behaviors that you could ask people to do more of. And then finally, follow up, right? Build recognition of this into your team meeting. So you can start to acknowledge these behaviors explicitly and publicly regularly, right? This is going to, again, tie everything back to these values so you have that core building block to make this an opportunity for growth rather than just reacting. And so one example, I keep going back to this value of trust, I think is critically important right now. So some specific questions, if you choose trust to discuss in your team meeting, you can ask some of these questions. What does trust look like in a purely remote situation, right? What's expected of me to demonstrate trust as an individual, as a leader, as a cross-functional leader, whatever those examples may be? How are managers and leaders going to lead by example and demonstrate trust? What should we look for and what can we expect so we feel supported? And then ask yourselves around trust, there's this concept around, are we really in a results-only work environment, right? And what a results-only work environment is an environment which a high-functioning remote team should be in, which is we focus on output, not when, where, and how they're getting it done, right? We're not focusing on managing by butts and seats. We're focusing on looking at what everyone's getting done each day. And it's not about being online at an exact time or being present on Slack and answering things every 30 seconds, right? It's about what did you get done at the end of the day? How close are we to that and trusting each other that we're all going to get things done? So again, it's around accountability, right? Do we trust people to hold themselves accountable when we can't see them? What does it look like? How will we know? How will we support that? All big questions. These aren't easy questions, but they're the ones we need to start thinking about really critically right away. So again, if you are struggling as a team to think about what some of these new remote work values might be for your org, here are some samples, right? You may want to think about adding some of these to your team's charter or whatever you use to track this. First one, empathy is everything, right? Going back to that idea of assuming positive intent. We're all dealing with different situations at home, different working situations. So assume that people are trying to get it done and the blockers they're running into aren't their fault. Transparency, being honest with each other, right? Thinking about, if something isn't working, if you're not getting it right, share that, understand that we're all in this together. Asynchronicity is okay. What that means is it's not about when you're getting the work done, it's that you're getting it done, right? So if you're more focused later at night, if that's what your core work hours are going to be, that's okay as long as you're sharing that with people and you don't have to be exactly in the office at the exact same time. That may be something that's really helpful for your team, especially if you're across distributed time zones. This is in normal circumstances, asynchronous work with remote teams across the world is kind of expected, but now you can add a little flexibility there. Another thing is important with virtual work is expect more structure. So I talked about this last week. Again, go back to those virtual meeting best practices. You need a little more structure in your virtual meetings because you don't have the flexibility that we typically are used to in an in-person meeting. What that means is all your meetings need agendas. All your meetings need roles. All your meetings should have some sort of pre-work. So again, we're not just stuck in these not very useful meetings and people can jump right in and understand where you are without having to catch people up. So that's where the structure comes in, roles, facilitators, understanding what the objectives are for a meeting. You got to share that ahead of time. And this last one I think is really important, different yet equal. Everyone on a remote team is equal, but their experiences are going to differ. Some of us are dealing with school closures and we're going to be working from home with kids alongside us. That's really stressful and difficult and is going to require some flexibility. Their team members still expected to pull their weight, but their experience may be wildly different from you, especially if you're in a different part of the country and you're experiencing different restrictions right now. So again, that goes along with transparency, but being honest and open about these things is going to help us continue to build those powerful cultures. So again, we're moving pretty quickly. I wanted to keep this around 30 minutes. So we're going to close up in about 5 minutes, the content section, and I'm going to answer some questions. So the final thing are some tools for virtual team collaboration. And here's a chance, I want to hear from you in the chat. What are some tools that you and your groups are using? Because I only have a sampling of them. And I think it's a great opportunity to share some of the things that you're using. So again, share the tool, maybe a link, and also how you're using it. I think that can be really valuable for everyone on this call. And I'll reshare that as well. So what are some resources that can help us work together virtually in this challenging time? So one is putting together a change management FAQ, right? Have a shared document that helps people dispel some of the myths around remote working. This is something I always like to put together when I'm working with a company to put together a remote working program. It's part of the change management around implementing any new program. everything's been put into hyperspeed with these last couple weeks. So some of these misnomers or myths around remote working probably still exist in your org. And it's important to have a shared understanding that leadership is bought into about, we don't believe these myths anymore. So the myth around remote workers are slackers, right? It's important to say, if people understand what they're responsible for, when it's due, and they're getting it done, they're not a slacker. Just because you can't see them working, their outputs are shared. That's part of what we're sharing every day in our team meetings, or through some sort of shared document where we talk about our work for the day, like a Trello board or any other project management tool. Another myth, it's up to the remote worker to constantly prove they're working and that they're not just watching Netflix because they're in their apartment, right? This is unfair, right? So it's also negatively impactful for your team, because if you're focusing more on showing how much you're working rather than actually doing the work, it builds anxiety. It's not very useful. And it's just not going to be, again, going back to that value of trust, it's not going to help you build that positive remote working culture. You're actually going to be working against it. So I would even call this as something of a red flag or a negative values behavior here. And finally, this last one, I asked this in the poll around core work hours. I think this is a really important thing to set in stone, setting strict working hours and sharing with your teams when you're available and when you are not, right? Just because my computer is 6 feet away from me, if I'm making dinner and it's 7 p.m., that's my time, right? I could respond to you, but it's not acceptable to expect that. And again, same with taking breaks. And like I said earlier, taking time off away from your phone so you can take a walk around outside, meditate, work out, whatever you need to do to make sure that you're pacing yourself. And again, these are from Trello's How to Embrace Work Ultimate Guide. Highly recommend that. Really, really useful tool. And also, here are some tools online that I've been researching, and I think they're really useful. So you may already use these. Zapier's Guide to Remote Work. We are going to put that in the chat. My assistant Athena will share that. Again, really good long book around things you and your team can start to do. So I won't go into all of them. I pulled some of those from today, but really worth a read. There's also a shared Google Doc that's going around the web right now. Highly recommend checking this out. Athena will put that in the chat. This has a variety of resources, articles and information on remote working, examples of company communications that HR and people ops departments have put together to educate people on remote work programs, and other resources that I think it may have changed literally overnight. So again, check this out. Really useful stuff there. I won't go into all the details, worth checking out. And there's also a list here of called Staying Home. So it's a list of companies that are going fully remote. Now, this is probably, most companies at this point. So again, it's a reference if you know people or you have clients or you're working with any of these companies, just to keep you up to date on what their status is. So another useful tool for you. Other technology tools that you may find useful are socialization tools. So Donut is a Slack app that is great for, again, just encouraging people to have this casual social interaction where you can, what it does is it embeds in your Slack and then automatically pairs you up with a random person who's signed up for Donut in your organization. And it encourages you to set up a one-on-one virtual meeting, just to chit chat, right? And you can add prompts in there and to encourage people to talk about non-work things. Again, for that casual, building that trust, building that virtual community, really useful. It's also useful to have tools for checking in on morale. So Chimp or Champ is one that works well in that situation, where it basically sends a weekly email to your team asking them how they're feeling. Were you a chimp today? Did you feel not great? Or were you a champ? Did you really knock it out of the park? Again, good data for you if you're a manager. If you don't necessarily want to do this publicly in a team meeting, you can get this one-on-one anonymously through email. Accountability tools. iDoneThis is a really good accountability tool where people can share asynchronously the work that they're getting done on a given day. This is an alternative to constant, never-ending Slack messages, which is really detrimental to good, deep work. So having a shared tool where people can post at the end of the day what I got done maybe you revisit that in your weekly team meeting so people don't feel that need to constantly be updating each other, which can really detract from productivity. And here's one, I don't have as much familiarity with this one, but the Woo board is another casual social tool you can use to share things people are excited about, and sharing it publicly asynchronously, getting away from just chatting and texting each other this stuff. I'm curious if you have experience using any of these. I think they're really useful. But again, if you have other tools, I've seen some come through in the chat, really useful to share those as well. So that's it for the content portion of the day today. I want to now move to Q&A. And as I'm doing that, I know some of you may be dropping off at this point. Just know that video of today will be emailed to you if you signed up and shared your email. I'm also going to be posting it on social media. And please go ahead and share it. The on-demand video is available for everyone. We've had great reaction, so please share it with anyone who's interested. We've also opened up a new page on oakenreads.com. So go to the homepage, you'll see a big button for remote work resources. You'll have videos from these past 2 webinars, as well as we're constantly updating more content around how to set up your team for success. And also you can see the link for next Wednesday's webinar is going to be in the chat. So if we don't have that right now, we will get you that as well in the email response to today. So go ahead and sign up for that. I'm actually going to just quickly make sure that you have that in the notes section so that you can sign up if you have to leave for whatever reason. Okay. All right. So I'm curious about questions. So let's go ahead and go to the Q&A section and see what we have. So we have from Lucy. Oh, hi, Lucy. How can we ensure that new employees, those who joined our team in the last 3 months or less, feel like they are part of the team and that we're grateful to have them? So this is good. This is a good question, because especially if someone joined and is now being thrown into this mix, I think it's really, really tough for them. One of the things I talk about with manager skills trainings is anytime a teammate joins or leaves a team, it's a really good time to reflect and examine what are the formal and informal roles on a working team. We didn't talk about this explicitly today, but there are a lot of roles and responsibilities that people have assigned to them. It's their job, but there are also informal roles that people take upon themselves. The informal social lead who always organizes the happy hours, or the informal tech expert who everyone goes to with questions. I think it's a good opportunity to formalize some of those expectations and allow these new people to step in and take on some of those informal roles for themselves. Maybe they're a great tech expert. They may want to take that off someone's plate. And it's also a good opportunity to share some of those things that go unsaid with expectations and expertise in those moments. So I think that's probably my best advice for you right now, is talk about those formal and informal roles and how they can step up into those. All right, let's see what our next one. Okay, we've got Bill. Most people don't like being on video. Please stress the importance of video to connect to people. Yeah, Bill, I would say being on video is something that takes a little bit of practice and can feel uncomfortable. I talked a little bit in the last webinar about little tips and tricks to make yourself look better and feel better and more confident on video, like raising your camera up, using the touch up my appearance thing, making sure your lighting is good. Video is the only way that you are going to get the additional information that is shared non-verbally. Thinking like facial expressions, body language, all that information that you get in person. If you go blank screen and no one can see you, all of that context and information is lost. So if you really want to get empirical and really get evidence-based with your arguments to people who don't want to show video, tell them that we need that information. We need the nonverbals in order to keep our team structure healthy and alive. So Rory, we have a question here. Our team is using Ring Central. Okay, kind of sharing what you're working on. That's a great one. Just having a shared tool like that. And someone's mentioning Slack. You mentioned Slack a number of times. What is that? Well, that's a great question. So again, people come to this with all sorts of levels of experience. Slack is basically a messaging app that companies use to keep in touch with each other. And it's better than something like just a text message, because within Slack, you can connect other tools that you may be using online, like Google Docs or like calendars, or it's really useful for engineers to do coding and kind of share that. So there's a lot of extra interactivity tools. If you're not already using Slack, you're probably not going to be adapting it right now. But if you are, go to slack.com. You can sign up for free, start to experiment, add people into your team. It's a great way to, again, kind of keep in touch with people. Yeah, here's a mention in chat. It also has different channels. So you can have a conversation about a topic and not have it take over a conversation about other topics that, you know, maybe you're less interested in. You can focus by area, by subject matter, by team. Really useful for staying connected and basically taking all that communication off of email, which is a very flat type of communication medium. So I see that looks like that's it for the questions. And so what I'm going to go ahead and do is wrap things up. Again, to cover what we were here to do. We wanted to talk about maintaining social and professional ties. And we wanted to look at how can we use values as that core home base to refer back to make sure that the behaviors we are setting out as expectations are central to maintaining the culture that we've already agreed is important at whatever organization we're at. And finally, I shared a little bit of online tools to help people make the most out of remote collaboration. So again, this has been a presentation of Oak & Reads. We are an interactive training consultancy where we help people with all of these skills that I just talked about today. Today was just a high-level overview of a lot of the things we like to go in depth into with our clients. So if this was interesting, if you'd like to bring us in to work with your teams, especially in this time where it's hard to get things done remotely, shoot me an email and let's talk, because I love to bring this kind of content to organizations and different businesses. So again, I'm going to wrap things up. You are going to get video of today emailed to you, and I'm also going to share it on social. It's available on demand, so you can share it with all of your teammates. And all these videos will now be posted on oakandreads.com. Right now, the URL is Work From Home Wednesday. That may change later today as we're building out this website, but if you just go to oakandreads.com, you'll be directed to all those resources. And again, please sign up for next week's webinar. And what I'm curious about is what would you like to learn about next week? So I'm going to open up a poll right now and I'm going to launch it. So what are you interested in learning about? Here are some options I'm thinking about, but maybe you have something you want to talk about. If so, put it in the chat box. I'm going to be reviewing that in the next couple of days, and I'm going to announce on Friday what next week's webinar we'll discuss. So again, sign up for that right now just so you don't miss it. I'll be blasting more information as well. And feel free to reach out to me, dave@oakandreads.com, if you'd like to discuss any of the things we talked about today. All right, so I'll leave that poll open for you as we close things out. But otherwise, thank you so much for coming today. Best of luck with your remote working. Please stay safe out there. Check in with your friends and family. Take breaks. And otherwise, I will see you right here at your computer next Wednesday at noon Pacific. So thanks everyone for coming and have a great rest of your day.